It was an ordinary afternoon on Silver Pine Lane, the kind where the sun hangs low, casting golden light over neat lawns and picket fences, and you'd expect nothing more than a quiet chat over tea. My sister Julia had swung by my modest bungalow, her laughter filling the air as we sipped chamomile and swapped stories. She was always my anchor, 3 years older, with a Peace Corps-owned instinct for spotting trouble beneath the surface. That day, trouble didn't just not get kicked the door down. Within minutes, our cozy catch-up turned into a nightmare that would unravel a sinister plot, expose a neighborhood's dark underbelly, and spark a rebellion that would echo far beyond Silver Pine Lane. If you're intrigued by tales of defiance and justice, you'll want to check out my YouTube channel, MidnightTales, where I dive into stories like this one, real, raw, and unforgettable. I'd moved to Silver Pine Lane after a bruising divorce, chasing the dream of a fresh start in a place where neighbors waved and kids played freely. Julia, ever the optimist, had sold me on the idea of a tight-knit community 2 blocks from her own home. On paper, it was perfect. Charming bungalows, tree-lined streets, and a promise of safety. But the reality was far uglier. The HOA, a self-appointed cabal of petty tyrants, ruled with an iron grip. Their so-called neighborhood security officers, or HOA cops, as we called them, patrolling with smug grins and clipboards. They dictated everything: the precise shade of white for your fence, the acceptable decibel of your dog's bark, the exact hour your trash bins could sit curbside. It wasn't about order. It was control, plain and simple, cloaked in the guise of community pride. I tried to keep my head down, convincing myself I could play by their rules to avoid trouble. But trouble, it turns out, had my address. Julia saw through the HOA's facade from the start. A veteran of tough places, she'd learned to spot tyranny dressed up as structure. Document everything, she urged, her voice sharp with conviction. As she pointed out the warning letters piling up on my counter, my lawn was a half-inch too tall, they claimed. My vines were creeping into neighbor airspace. It was absurd, but the citations kept coming, each one a jab meant to keep me in line. Julia wasn't having it. She'd been through too much to let petty bullies run the show, and she was determined to dig deeper. That afternoon, as we sat on my porch, she was fuming about a neighbor, Rachel, who'd been slapped with a fine because her teenage son chased his dropped phone near the community dumpster. This isn't about rules, Julia said, her eyes narrowing. There's something bigger going on, and we're going to find out what. Before we could finish our tea, the porch door rattled under a heavy knock. 2 HOA cops stood there, one short and stocky, the other tall and wiry, both radiating the kind of self-importance that makes your skin crawl. "You there?" the shorter one barked, pointing at Julia. "Are you the homeowner?" She raised an eyebrow, calm but defiant. "No, I'm her sister." His lips curled into a sneer. "Then you're trespassing." "Trespassing? On my own porch?" Julia laughed, incredulous, but they weren't joking. They cited some obscure HOA code claiming non-residents needed written permission to visit. When she challenged them, their tone turned icy. "You're under HOA detention," the short one declared, whipping out handcuffs. I stepped in, demanding their legal basis, but they ignored me. In a blur, they had Julia in cuffs, her wrists bound as they dragged her down the steps. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, watching my sister, my fierce, unflappable sister, being hauled away like a criminal. They took her to the community center, their makeshift headquarters, and locked her in a back room. I raced after them, my pulse thundering, but they blocked the entrance. "She's interfering with HOA business," the tall one said, his voice dripping with disdain. I called the police, pleading for help, but they dismissed it as a civil matter and refused to intervene. My sister was being unlawfully detained, and no one would lift a finger. That's when I noticed him, a man in a suit, older, quiet, standing near the door. He blended in too well, his eyes scanning the scene with a predator's focus. Our gazes locked for a moment, and a chill ran through me. Was it recognition? Threat? I couldn't tell. The HOA cops ordered me to leave or face detention myself. Furious, helpless, I stormed home, my hands shaking as I posted about it in a private neighborhood group on A few neighbors replied with sympathy, but fear of retaliation kept them silent. This place was infected, and I was starting to see how deep it ran. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions. Who was that man in the suit? Why was Julia targeted? By morning, everything changed. A pounding at my door jolted me awake. 3 men in dark suits stood there, one flashing a badge. "Secret Service," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "We're looking for a woman named Julia." My stomach dropped. "That's my sister," I stammered. "The HOA has her." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. 10 minutes later, black SUVs screeched into the community center's parking lot. Neighbors peeked from their driveways as the agents stormed in, their presence a stark contrast to the HOA cops' petty swagger. The lead agent, a man named Rains, didn't waste words. "We have reason to believe you're detaining a federal witness," he said, his tone cutting through the room. The HOA cops, so smug the day before, were now pale, stammering excuses. The short one tried to demand ID, mumbling about authority, but it was futile. The agents pushed past, and there was Julia, handcuffed to a chair, her expression a mix of defiance and relief. Then I saw him again, the man in the suit, standing in the corner. Agent Rains' eyes locked onto him, and the air shifted. "I've been looking for you, Dalton," he said, his voice like steel. Dalton wasn't just some HOA consultant. He was a fugitive, wanted for financial crimes and suspected ties to extremist groups. Julia, it turned out, had known months ago. She'd spotted him at a neighborhood fundraiser and recognized him from her Peace Corps days, where she'd learned to sniff out trouble. She'd been working quietly with the Secret Service, feeding them intel on Dalton's movements. The HOA, wittingly or not, had detained a federal informant, and their house of cards was collapsing. The fallout was swift and brutal. Local police, who'd brushed me off hours earlier, now swarmed the scene, taking orders from the feds. The HOA board resigned en masse, their authority crumbling under the weight of their own corruption. Several enforcers were arrested for unlawful detention, and the puppet master, HOA President Kyle Monroe, vanished. Back at my house, Agent Rains laid it all bare. Julia had suspected the HOA was more than just a nuisance. She'd uncovered financial inconsistencies, fines, penalties, fake violations, all part of a scheme to pressure residents into handing over cash. The HOA was a front, laundering money for Dalton's network. Every citation, every power trip, was a cog in their machine. Over the next few weeks, Julia and I pored over evidence, helping the feds track Monroe. A tip led us to a rundown motel, 2 towns over. We told ourselves we were just confirming his location, but when we spotted him and he bolted, instinct took over. We chased him through the parking lot, my heart racing as he lunged at Julia, trying to snatch her phone. Just then, black SUVs roared in, and Agent Rains stepped out. "Kyle Monroe," he called, "hands where we can see them." Monroe froze, then surrendered, his empire in ruins. The aftermath made headlines. Monroe faced charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, intimidation, obstruction of justice, and illegal detention. Several HOA cronies were indicted, and prosecutors called it one of the most egregious abuses of HOA power in state history. Julia testified before a congressional panel on private community abuses, her words powerful and unflinching. Victims from other states reached out, advocacy groups offered her positions, but she waved them off. "I'm not here for politics," she said. "I'm here so this never happens again." On MidnightTales I shared our story, and the response was overwhelming. Thousands of views. Comments from people who'd faced similar HOA nightmares, all inspired by Julia's courage. Silver Pine Lane transformed. A new democratic HOA emerged, transparent and community-run, with enforcement handed to city authorities. Neighbors once silenced by fear now gathered openly, sharing stories, food, and apologies. Julia and I organized a community memorial, not for lives lost, but for trust regained. We planted a tree in the main park, its plaque reading, "Where fear once grew, hope now stands." The day Monroe pleaded guilty, accepting a 22-year sentence, Julia and I sat in the courtroom's front row. When the gavel fell, a collective breath escaped the room. We squeezed hands, tears stinging my eyes. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded. "We really did." Silver Pine Lane wasn't just a place we survived, it was a place we reclaimed. The scars remain, but so does the hope. Neighbors smile again, kids play freely, and the air feels lighter. If you want to hear more stories of resilience and rebellion, swing by MidnightTales on YouTube. We're not just telling stories, we're sparking change, one tale at a time.